Okay, we're going to look at some quick examples of how to find the midpoint and then how to find an endpoint if you're given midpoint and an endpoint to get ready for a quiz you're going to have in class tomorrow. So the first thing you're going to have to know is the midpoint formula, of course. And so if you have forgotten the midpoint formula, it is the sum of the x's divided by 2, and then the sum of the y's divided by 2. Okay? So, of course, the most important thing for just if the directions say find the midpoint is can you figure out what's x and what's y, right? So remember the first value in the ordered pair is the x value. So this would be x1 and this would be x2. And then you want to be able to also find the y values. So here's y. So here is y1 and here is y2. And so all we have to do is average these guys to find the midpoint. So if I add my x's and then divide by 2, and I add my y's and then divide by 2, that's going to give me my midpoint. So 1 plus negative 6 is negative 5, and 0 plus 1 is 1, right? And you can actually leave it in fractions like this. I'm perfectly fine with that. You can go to mixed numbers. So if I were to go to mixed numbers, I would say 2 goes into 5 2 times with 1 left over. So this would be negative 2.5, 1/2. Or you can go to decimals if that's your preference. So that would be negative 2.5 and 0.5, right? And I can actually make a quick sketch to determine if I am in the right place or not. I'm not going to do this every single time, but I do want you to understand that just a quick sketch sometimes will really help with, do I have this in the right place? So here's point 1 at right 1 up and down 0. So here's point 1. And then point 2 is at negative 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, positive 1, which is up here, right? And so if I were to make a line segment between these two, and I'm just going to grab a ruler so this doesn't look crazy. If I were to make a line segment between these two, I could find the middle of the line segment, right? And this should be where it happens. So I just want to make sure this point actually looks like it's in the middle, right? So starting at 0, 0, that would be negative 2.5, 1, 2.5, and then up 1/2, right? So that does indeed look like it's in the middle of my line segment. So that's just a kind of an easy, quick check to make sure that you're doing what you should be doing, okay? So let's do that again, finding the midpoint. I'm going to first identify the x's. Those are my first values. And then I'm going to identify the y's. Those are my second values. And then I just average them. So I'm just going to add them, negative 2 plus 0, and divide by 2. And then add these two, 1 plus 5 divided by 2. And then I add before I divide, so negative 2 plus 0 is negative 2. 1 plus 5 is 6. And then divide. Negative 2 divided by 2 is negative 1. 6 divided by 2 is 3. Okay? And I'm going to do one more graph check with you. Again, just kind of confirming that this midpoint really is in the middle. So let me get some tick marks here on my axes. Remember, this is my x-axis. So I have a point, my first point at negative 2, 1. So that's right there. My second point at 0, right and left, up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So here's my line segment that I'm trying to find the midpoint of, or halfway between the 2 points. And then I'm just checking the point negative 1, 3 to make sure it's actually falling in the middle of this line. So negative 1, 1, 2, 3. And of course, I'm not perfect here because of not having graph paper, but it does indeed look like it's in the middle. So I feel pretty confident that this is going to be the midpoint. Okay, so let's look at number 3. I'm going to do the same exact process. We're going to say, okay, negative 2 is going to go with negative 8, and then negative 10 and negative 9. And we could be doing this intuitively, guys, right? We could be saying, if I were on a number line, what's halfway between negative 2 and negative 8? What's halfway between negative 2 and negative 8? And so we could, say, okay, well, negative 2, negative 3, negative 4, negative 5, negative 6, negative 7, negative 8. And we could sit here, and it's, it's a lot like thinking about the median of like what is right in the middle. Okay, but rather than having to do this a bunch of times, that's why we can add and divide by 2, right? So we are using the mean, but we could be using the median. So we're saying x's together, negative 2 plus negative 8 divided by 2, and then negative 10 plus negative 9 divided by 2. Add before you divide. So if I add negative 2 and negative 8, I get negative 10. And if I add negative 10 plus negative 9, I get negative 19. And if I now divide, I get negative 10 divided by 2, which is negative 5. And this doesn't divide evenly, but I could turn it to mixed numbers. 2 goes into 19 9 times, right? Because 2 times 9 is 18, leaving 1 left over. And then, of course, I could do decimals if your preference is decimals, and that would be negative 5, and then negative 9.5. Okay. And again, I'm not going to graph that this time, but you could, of course, graph the 2 points and then check to see that that's actually in the middle, right? All right, one more time for finding the midpoint. I'm going to identify my x's, and then I'm going to identify my y's. And I find the average of the x's, so that's 7 plus negative 4 divided by 2. Oh, I missed a y here. How about 1 and negative 2? And then 1 plus negative 2 divided by 2. Add before you divide. 7 plus negative 4 is 3. 1 plus negative 2 is negative 1. I'm in fractions. Guys, you can leave it as improper fractions. I'm perfectly fine with that. Or I can go to mixed numbers. So 2 goes into 3, 1, leaving 1 left over. This, of course, does not go to mixed numbers because the numerator is smaller. Or I can go to decimals, which is negative. Don't know where that negative is coming from. Is 1.5, right? 1.5 is 1.5, negative 0.5. That would be the decimal answer. Or any of these answers starting from right here. This would be acceptable, this would be acceptable, and this would be acceptable. Either one of them or any of them. Okay. All right, this is the part that we talked about today that I think kind of was stumping people just a little bit. So we talked about this a couple of ways, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do both ways. First, we talked about sort of an intuitive way to think about if I have an endpoint and then I know the midpoint and I want to find the other endpoint, I can just think about what's the distance from endpoint to midpoint and then use that same distance to go from midpoint to other endpoint in the same direction. Okay, so let me get a color here. That is not a highlighter. Here we go. So if I'm looking at my x's, right, so I'm trying to find an x, I would think to myself, how far is it from 9 to 5? How far is it from 9 to 5? and I'm decreasing by 4, right? So the distance is 4, but I'm going down by 4. So if this is the midpoint, then the other endpoint has to be the same distance on the other side. So I'm going to do 5, and I'm going to go, all right, I'm going to reduce again by 4, and that's going to put me on the other side of it, right? So 9 to 5 is 4, and then 5 to 1 is 4 again. So now 5 is 4 away from 9, and 5 is 4 away from 1. Okay? And then I can do the same thing for the y's. So again, I'm just kind of talking, intuitively what's going on here. I can say, all right, what happens with my y values? So from -8 to -4, now I'm actually increasing by 4. Instead of decreasing by 4, I'm increasing by 4. So I'm going to go 4 on the other side of -4. I'm actually going to end at 0. So from -4 to -8 is a distance of 4, and from -4 to 0 is a distance of 4. So that tells me that this has to be the other endpoint for that to be in the middle. This is kind of a concept that's confusing for people, so I told you can use algebra. You absolutely can use algebra. So if I wanted to write steps, on how to find this, okay, the first thing I'm going to want to do is write my midpoint formula. And after I get my midpoint formula down, I can take that midpoint formula and I can set the formula equal to the given midpoint. Right? I can set the formula equal to the given midpoint. After I do that, then I'm going to plug x1, y1, which is going to be given, into the formula. Once I plug x1, y1 into the formula, then I want to set x's equal to x's and y's equal to y's. Right? All right, so now I've got two equations, and I'm going to work an example. It's going to make more sense in a second. Now I've got two equations, and I can just solve. And then once I have my two equations solved, then I can write my answer as an ordered pair. Okay, so this is sort of like how I would solve for an endpoint instead of solving for the midpoint. If I were going to use algebra. And remember, I told you don't have to use algebra. You can absolutely use that counting method that we talked about. Okay? All right, so now let's see if we can take those steps and solve some problems. Okay? So if my first step is write the midpoint formula, I'm going to start there. Okay, so you're going to just ignore all this previous work. And we're going to look at just this problem. Okay? So my midpoint formula is x1 plus y1, I don't know, sorry, x1 plus x2, x1 plus x2 divided by 2, and then y1 plus y2 divided by 2. All right, so I write my formula. Then I set the formula equal to the given midpoint. So in this problem, the given midpoint is this 5, -4 right here. So I've got a given midpoint 5, negative 4. Okay, so I know that's going to be true. All right, after I set the formula equal to the given midpoint, then I'm going to plug the given point into the formula for x1, y1. So here we go, just like before. Here's x1, here's y1, right? So now, here's x1, and here's y1. So, we know that 9 plus some number, some x value divided by 2, is going to give me 5. And we know that negative 8 plus some y value divided by 2 is going to give me 4. Right? So I'm just going to plug in the point I know. Then I'm going to set my x is equal to my x's and my y is equal to my y's. So here's an x, here's an x. Maybe I can stick with the same color scheme. I'm going to set x equal to x, and I'm going to set y equal to y. All right. So I have 9 plus x sub 2 divided by 2 is equal to 5. And negative 8, let me come over here a little further, get out of this space. Negative 8 plus y2 over 2 is going to be equal to negative 4. And this is definitely more work, guys. This way is definitely more work. Okay, now I can solve both of these equations and get rid of the fractions simply by multiplying by 2. So that's going to give me 9 plus x2 is equal to 2 times 5, which is 10. And then I can subtract 9 from each side, and I'm running out of room, I'm sorry. And I get x sub 2 is equal to 10 minus 9, which is 1. And I'll write smaller on the next one so that's not so crazy looking. And then over here, same thing. So I can multiply both sides by 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1. And I end up with negative 8 y sub 2 equals 2 times negative 4, which is negative 8. And then add 8 to both sides, making this 0. And I get y is equal to negative 8 plus 8, which is 0. Okay. Wow, that looks crazy on the screen now that I'm looking at it. I'm sorry for the disorganization. Okay, so let's do another one. And this time I'm going to start with the algebra method, and then I'll switch back over to the intuitive method, right? So we're on a roll with this concept, so let's do that again. Okay, so here's my problem. Negative 10, negative 3. If you want to pause now and actually try this problem, that would be awesome. But if you want to watch another one first, that's good too. Okay? So we're going to write the midpoint formula. So x1 plus x2 divided by 2. y1 plus y2 divided by 2. And we're going to set that formula equal to the given midpoint. So the given midpoint is negative 7, negative 9. Again, I'm looking for that endpoint, that other endpoint. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to replace x1 with the given x1. And I'm going to replace y1 with the given y1. So now I'm going to write this as negative 10 plus y2 over 2. And then negative 3 plus y2 over 2 is going to be negative 7, negative 9. And now I'm going to go x's to x's again. So after I plug in, then I set x's to x's. So I'm going to go this guy with this guy, right? First term with first term. And then second term with second term. So I'm going to take negative 10 plus y2 over 2, set it equal to negative 7, and I'm going to take negative 3 plus y2 over 2, set it equal to negative 9. Then I'm just going to multiply both sides times 2. Right? I'm getting rid of the divided by 2 big fraction every single time. Just make sure you do it on both sides. 2 times negative 7 is negative 14. Then I'm going to add 10, right? Because I need to get this to go to 0. And that's going to tell me that y2, am I doing y's? This should be an x2. Can't read my own handwriting. x2 is going to be negative 14 plus 10, which is negative 4. Okay? And then I'm going to do the y's over here. Again, getting rid of this big divided by 2 simply by multiplying by 2 on each side. I get negative 3 plus y2 equals 2 times negative 9, which is negative 18. I get rid of the negative 3 by adding 3 to both sides. That's now 0. And so I now have y2 is equal to negative 18 plus 3, which is negative 15. This makes my midpoint, writing my answer as an ordered pair, negative 4, negative 15. Okay. Lot of work. If I use the intuitive method, and I'm just going to flip my note card over here and kind of show you this again. I have an endpoint at negative 10, negative 3. I have a midpoint at negative 7, negative 9. And then on the other side of the midpoint is the other endpoint, if the midpoint's going to be in the middle, right? So let's do this way. I think about how far is it from negative 10 to negative 7? And I'm going 3 in the positive direction. So if I want to go the other side of that, then I'm going to go 3 more, and that's going to take me on the other side of negative 7, the same amount, so it'll be in the middle. So I'm just going to go 3 more. So I'm at negative 10, I go up 3 to negative 7, I go up 3 more to negative 4. So that should be the x value we got using all that algebra, and it is. Okay? So let's do that again. I think about my y's now. My y values, that's the second number, remember? I go from negative 3 to negative 9. Negative 3 to negative 9. So I think about on a number line, if I'm at negative 3 and I go down to negative 9. So that means I'm actually decreasing by 6 on my y's. So I need to go on the other side of the midpoint. So I need to keep doing the same exact operation. I would go down 6 again. So if I'm at negative 9 and I go down 6 more, I'm now at negative 15, which is the same exact thing that I got from all that algebra. And guys, I really don't care what method you prefer. You just use whichever method makes the most sense to you. Okay? Okay, let's do number 7. Let's do number 7. Use either method you want, but now would be a good time to hit pause and actually try this problem. If you're not going to hit pause, then let's keep on going. Or if you're now hitting play, haha. So, I have, I'm writing my formula, x1 plus x2 over 2, y1 plus y2 over 2, and I'm setting it equal to the given midpoint, which is negative 9, negative 3. And I know x1 and y1, right? These are my x1 and y1. They're an endpoint. So I'm going to plug in, and I'm going to stop using colors now. So here's my x1, 4 plus x2 over 2. Here's my y1, negative 6 plus y2 over 2 is negative 9, negative 3, right? And now I can make my two equations. I know my x's have to be equal, so I can take 4 plus x2 over 2 and set it equal to -9, and my y's have to be equal to each other. So we're going to have -6 plus y2 over 2 is equal to -3. And then I can use that same exact process, undo divided by 2 by multiplying by 2. And I get 4 plus x sub 2 is 2 times -9, which is -18. And then subtract 4, and I get x sub 2 is -22. Same sign, add, keep the sign. And then right here, same first step, undo divided by 2 by multiplying by 2. Make sure you do it on both sides. I get -6 plus y sub 2 is 2 times -3, which is -6. I undo plus 6 to y by, I undo -6 to y by adding 6. And I get y sub 2 is -6 plus 6, which is 0. And then I write my final answer as the ordered pair, -22, 0. And I'll do this one more way, the intuitive way. So I'm just going to flip my card over here. So I have an endpoint at 4, -6. I have a midpoint at -9, -3. And I want to figure out what's the endpoint on the other side of that midpoint. Okay? So I think to myself, how far is it from 4 to -9? So I need to go down 4 to 0 and then 9 more to -9. So I'm actually decreasing by 13, right? And then that means I need to keep on decreasing so that I have the same distance on either side of the midpoint. So if I keep decreasing, I get -22, I believe. -22. For my x value. Actually, we can check that because we already worked it once. Yep, that's indeed what matches what we did with algebra. And then if I look at it this way, I actually increased this time. I went from -6 to -3, so I actually increased by 3. I went right 3. So I need to go right 3 on the other side of it then. So if I increase -3, I'm at -3, I increase 3, or go to the right 3, I'm now at 0. And so I got the same -22, 0 that I got using algebra. So, one more. If you have not tried this on your own yet, I suggest you pause now and try the problem. Okay, looking at this good guy right here. I'm only going to do this with algebra this time, so if you're doing it the other way, you can check your work. Okay, so I'm going to write my formula. x1 plus x2 over 2, y1 plus y2 over 2.